147 million exposed. 1 unpatched server. 76 days undetected. This is the Equifax breach. In the summer of 2017, something was happening inside the servers of one of the most powerful companies in America, and nobody knew. For 76 days, an attacker moved through the network of Equifax, one of the 3 credit bureaus that controls the financial identity of nearly every adult in the United States. They ran more than 9,000 queries against the company's databases, extracting names, birth dates, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, and credit card details. 147.9 million Americans. That's nearly half the country. And the reason nobody noticed for over 2 months? A security certificate had expired. A $10 digital certificate. The kind of thing any IT department should renew automatically. But at Equifax, that certificate had been expired for 19 months. The monitoring tool that was supposed to catch exactly this kind of intrusion was sitting there, powered on but functionally blind, for a year and a half. This is the story of the largest theft of personal data in American history, not carried out by criminal hackers in a basement, but by officers in the Chinese military, and made possible by a company that stored database passwords in plain text, used admin as a default login, and ignored a critical security patch for 2 months while the entire internet screamed about it. Before we talk about what went wrong, you need to understand what Equifax actually is. Because most people have heard the name, but don't realize just how much power this company holds over their lives. Equifax is one of America's big 3 credit bureaus, along with Experian and TransUnion. Together, these 3 companies track the financial behavior of virtually every adult in the country. Every credit card you've ever opened, every loan you've applied for, every missed payment, every bankruptcy, every address you've ever lived at. It's all in their files. And here's the part that makes it different from almost any other company that holds your data. You didn't sign up. You never agreed to give Equifax your information. Banks, lenders, landlords, and utility companies report your data to credit bureaus automatically. Equifax doesn't work for you. You are the product. They make money by selling your credit data to companies that want to evaluate you. Whether you should get a mortgage, whether you should get a job, whether you should rent an apartment. And in 2016, that business model generated $3.1 billion in revenue. On March 7, 2017, the Apache Software Foundation disclosed a critical vulnerability in Apache Struts 2, a web framework used by thousands of companies, including many in the Fortune 500. The vulnerability was designated CV 2017-5638. It had a CVSS severity score of 10 out of 10, the maximum possible. The flaw was in the Jakarta multi-part parser, the component that handles file uploads. If you sent an HTTP request with a specially crafted content type header, the server wouldn't process it as text. It would process it as executable code. In practical terms, anyone could send a single web request to a vulnerable server and gain complete control of it. Within hours of the disclosure, proof of concept exploit code was circulating online. The next day, March 8th, the Department of Homeland Security sent Equifax a direct warning. Patch this now. On March 9th, Equifax's Global Threat and Vulnerability Management team sent an internal email to all relevant staff. The message was clear. Apply the Apache Struts patch within 48 hours. That was company policy. 48 hours. But one system didn't get patched. The Automated Consumer Interview System, known as ACIS. This was Equifax's public-facing online portal where consumers could file credit disputes. It ran Apache Struts, and it was directly connected to back-end databases containing the credit records of hundreds of millions of Americans. On March 15th, Equifax ran a scan to identify any system still running the vulnerable version of Struts. The scan came back clean, but it was wrong. The scan missed ASIS entirely. Nobody noticed. Nobody followed up. And for the next 2 months, that one unpatched web application sat on the open internet, running a vulnerability with a severity score of 10 out of 10, connected directly to the most sensitive consumer data in the country. On May 13, 2017, the attackers made their move. They sent a crafted HTTP request to the ASIS web application, exploiting CV 2017-5638 to execute arbitrary code on the server. Once inside, they established a web shell, a persistent backdoor that gave them command line access whenever they wanted. But ASIS was just the entry point. The real prize was deeper inside the network. And the attackers found something that made their job remarkably easy. Sitting on the ASIS servers was a configuration file containing unencrypted usernames and passwords for 48 other Equifax databases. Database credentials, in plain text, on a public-facing web server. Using those credentials, the attackers moved laterally through Equifax's network, accessing database after database. They ran more than 9,000 queries over the next 76 days, extracting records in small batches, compressing them into temporary archive files, and exfiltrating them through encrypted channels designed to look like normal web traffic. They were patient, they were methodical, and they were completely invisible. Here's the detail that turns this story from a data breach into a case study in institutional negligence. Equifax had a tool that was specifically designed to catch what was happening. An SSL visibility appliance, a device that inspects encrypted network traffic leaving the ASIS environment. If it had been running, it would have seen the exfiltration immediately. Thousands of encrypted connections carrying compressed database records to external servers. But the device wasn't running. Its SSL certificate had expired. Not recently, not a few weeks ago, 19 months ago. For a year and a half, this critical monitoring device had been sitting idle because nobody renewed a digital certificate. And this wasn't an isolated problem. When investigators later audited Equifax's certificate management, they found that the company had allowed 324 SSL certificates to expire across its infrastructure. 79 of those were on business-critical domains. The monitoring tool that would have caught the breach on day one was blind, and it had been blind since before the vulnerability was even discovered. On July 29, 2017, an Equifax employee finally renewed the expired SSL certificate on the ASIS monitoring device. The moment the device came back online, it saw something alarming. Massive volumes of suspicious, encrypted traffic flowing out of the network. Traffic that had been invisible for 76 days. By July 30th, Equifax shut down the ASIS web portal, cutting off the attacker's access. On July 31st, CEO Richard Smith was informed of what the company internally called suspicious activity. But even now, Equifax didn't know the full scope. On August 2nd, they brought in Mandiant, a leading cybersecurity incident response firm, and quietly notified the FBI. Mandiant's investigators would later describe what they found as a textbook case of exploiting a known vulnerability, not sophisticated, but devastatingly effective because Equifax's defenses were so weak. While Equifax scrambled to understand the full scope of the breach, something else was happening inside the company. On August 25, 2017, Jun Ng, the Chief Information Officer of Equifax U.S. Information Solutions, texted a coworker. He suspected Equifax was the breached company. But instead of focusing on containment or response, Ng opened his browser and searched for something very specific. The impact of Experian's 2015 data breach on its stock price. He wanted to know how much money he was about to lose. That same day, Ng exercised all of his vested Equifax stock options, receiving 6,815 shares. He sold every single one. Total proceeds, nearly $1 million. By the time Equifax publicly disclosed the breach 13 days later, and the stock dropped 35%, Ng had already cashed out. The SEC and DOJ charged him with securities fraud. He pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison, ordered to pay $117,000 in restitution and a $55,000 fine. On September 7, 2017, Equifax dropped the bomb. In a public statement, the company disclosed that hackers had accessed the personal information of approximately 143 million American consumers. The number would later be revised upward to 147.9 million. Social security numbers, birth dates, addresses, driver's license numbers, credit card numbers for 209,000 people. Dispute documents containing sensitive personal information for another 182,000. The reaction was immediate and furious. This wasn't a social media hack where someone lost their email password. These were social security numbers, the single piece of information that underpins your entire financial identity in the United States. And Equifax had lost nearly half the country's worth of them. To make matters worse, Equifax's response was widely criticized. The company set up a website for consumers to check if they were affected, but the site was buggy, confusing, and initially asked people to waive their right to sue as a condition of checking their data, a clause they quickly reversed after a public outcry. The consequences inside Equifax were swift. On September 15th, Chief Information Officer David Webb and Chief Security Officer Susan Malden both quietly retired. On September 26th, CEO Richard Smith resigned, effective immediately. He forfeited his $3 million performance bonus, but walked away with $18.3 million in pension benefits. Smith was called before Congress on October 3rd, sitting before the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee. He said, "I am here today to say to each and every person affected by this breach, I am deeply sorry that this happened on my watch." When pressed about how it happened, Smith pointed to a single individual who had failed to ensure the Apache Struts patch was deployed. A single person. In a company with over 10,000 employees and revenues of $3 billion, the CEO blamed one unnamed employee for a failure that the House Oversight Committee would later attribute to 34 separate control and process breakdowns. For more than 2 years after the breach, the identity of the attackers remained unknown to the public. Then, on February 10, 2020, Attorney General William Barr stood at a podium and made an announcement that stunned the cybersecurity world. The Equifax breach had been carried out by 4 members of China's People's Liberation Army. Their names were Wu Jiong, Wang Qian, Su Ku, and Lu Lei. All 4 were officers in PLA Unit 54398, a military unit within the 54th Research Institute of the People's Liberation Army. A 9-count federal indictment charged them with computer fraud, economic espionage, and wire fraud. According to the indictment, the 4 hackers had routed their traffic through approximately 34 servers located in nearly 20 countries to obscure their location. They used encrypted communication channels and carefully designed their queries to mimic legitimate database traffic. Attorney General Barr called it a deliberate and sweeping intrusion into the private information of the American people. It was the largest known theft of personally identifiable information ever carried out by state-sponsored actors. None of the 4 individuals have been apprehended. They remain in China. In July 2019, Equifax agreed to a settlement with the Federal Trade Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and attorneys general from all 50 states. The price tag, $700 million. $425 million of that went into a consumer restitution fund. $175 million went to the state attorneys general, and $100 million was a civil penalty to the CFPB. On top of the settlement, Equifax was required to spend at least $1 billion improving its information security practices over the following 5 years, with mandatory third-party security assessments for 20 years. The total estimated cost of the breach to Equifax, $1.38 billion. For consumers, the settlement offered free credit monitoring for 4 years and identity theft insurance up to $1 million. Cash payments were technically available, initially up to $125 per person. But so many people filed claims that the actual payout ended up being around $6 to $7 each. The Equifax breach didn't happen because of a brilliant, never-before-seen attack. It happened because of negligence. Basic, preventable, systemic negligence. A patch was available for 2 months and nobody applied it. A vulnerability scan was run and it missed the affected system. Database passwords were stored in plain text on a public-facing server. An SSL certificate expired 19 months ago and nobody renewed it. 324 other certificates had also expired. There was no network segmentation between the public web portal and the production credit databases. Some systems were still using default administrator credentials. The House Oversight Committee identified 34 separate control and process failures. Not one mistake, 34. And this was a company that held the most sensitive financial data of half the American population. The lesson of Equifax isn't that cybersecurity is hard. The lesson is that the biggest breaches almost never happen because of sophisticated attackers. They happen because someone didn't do the basics. Patch your systems. Encrypt your credentials. Renew your certificates. Segment your networks. These aren't advanced techniques. They're fundamentals. And when a company trusted with the financial identity of 147 million people ignores those fundamentals, this is what happens. If this story made you angry, good. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, Digital Crime Files breaks down the biggest hacks, the most dangerous cybercriminals, and the digital battles that shape our world. Our last video covered Kevin Mitnick, the most dangerous hacker in history, the man who proved a phone call is more powerful than any exploit. If you haven't seen it, it's linked right here. And tell me in the comments, do you think Equifax was punished enough? $700 million sounds like a lot, but for a company that made $3 billion a year, was that real accountability? I want to hear your take. Digital Crime Files, the true crime of the internet.